tab of the event room. After the event, you will be able to watch a recording of today's presentation, which is one of a series of brief webinars designed to introduce you to the most common leader blind spots, seen and not seen, in the workplace. Further, we hope to provide you with insight into practical tools to boost your impact as an influencer or leader. We will be sharing essential information to know if you want to understand yourself and others. Counterproductive tendencies surface typically when a person is under pressure, feeling stressed, cornered, threatened, or insecure. We frequently refer to these risk factors as the dark side of personality, and they often reside in our blind spots, places where we don't see them, but they are painfully clear to others. We see the process of insight as a journey, an exploration of patterns and tendencies you may have when reacting with first impulse to unfavorable conditions, difficult people, or not getting your needs met. Leader failure rates have remained steady for at least 15 years. Ironically, leaders are not failing because of lack of experience or job knowledge. Most often, the reason that they derail are due to interpersonal factors. We refer to it as that thing I do. When I encounter resistance, feel threatened, or my needs are not being met. A growing body of evidence suggests that leaders and influencers can improve their impact when they are armed with the insights derived from self-reflection, assessments to compare their responses to others, reputational feedback from peers, and ongoing support from coaches and mentors. When these conditions are in place, insight emerges and paves the way to changing how others experience us. That journey begins with curiosity, which brings us to this presentation today. Let's get started.
Well, big hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm glad you carved out the time. I'm glad you made it. And whether you're joining us live, it is Wednesday morning in beautiful Los Angeles, California, where I am, or wherever you are, or you're listening to the replay, it tells me something about you, and that is you are a leader who wants to grow. You're not just content with the status quo, but you're the kind of person who's willing to get curious and uncover the hood a little bit and invest in your own growth and development. And I just want to honor you for making that decision today. We're going to cover a lot of content, and I believe it's going to be huge value for you, whether you lead on a big team or you just lead yourself right now. I believe that you're going to get something great from this. And as mentioned in the video, we're going to honor your time and make sure that we wrap up right around an hour. So my name is Luke Crowley, and I serve as an executive coach, which means I have the honor of helping leaders, teams, and organizations discover that they are even more talented and more capable than they might realize. And so I get the joy of partnering with those people to help them close the gap between ambitious vision and current reality and really put action to that vision and walk it out. And I am honored and really excited to present our speaker today. Dr. Larry Kuhn, we'll get to him in just a moment, but he is a clinical psychologist, an executive coach, the founder and the creator of AspireVue, and a musician extraordinaire. And there are a few people who have impacted and influenced my growth more than Dr. Larry. And it was about, I think it was 4 years ago now that we started working together, and his guidance became a huge growth factor in my life. And at the time, I was in an executive leadership role in an organization that had positioning and impact operations across the state of California. And to put it nicely, I was really, really struggling. I didn't want to move forward. I didn't know how to move forward. I kind of wanted to just quit and give up. And if you were to ask me where my hope was in that season, I would have told you it was very low and I didn't see much of it. I wasn't delivering great results. I wasn't getting good feedback. And in hindsight, I realized that I had so many blind spots that were crippling me and making the journey really, really difficult. And so starting the coaching experience, the coaching journey for me was huge. And it was through AspireVue, much of what we'll be discussing today, that I took a few leadership assessments. I committed to the coaching process, and I started gaining insight, clarity, uncovering some of the blind spots and getting clear about my strengths, my gaps, some of the huge things that were in the way. And I started investing my time and my energy differently. I realized I was overestimating myself and overestimating in some areas and significantly underestimating in others. I was working really hard to control things that I couldn't, and giving no effort or time to things that I actually needed to take responsibility for. And that experience started 4 years ago, but it has deeply shaped and set a new course for who I am today, and the way I coach, the way I lead, the way I show up as a husband, as a friend, just as a human being. It's really impacted every sphere of my life. And now I get the joy and the privilege and the honor to walk with other leaders as they go on a similar journey. So I believe you're going to get so much out of this conversation today. And whether you think you might have some blind spots, or I know all of us who work with people might have a few people in mind that we would say they have the blind spots and they're the ones that need to change. Well, we're going to dig into all that, and Dr. Larry's going to deliver something really powerful. And so we will have time for Q&A. And so feel free to throw those questions into the chat. We'll make time for them. And do make sure that you stay right to the very end, because we have a really special offer that we're excited to share with you. Those of you who are here live with us today, it will only be available for you. And so without further ado, why don't you grab a notebook, open up a notes page, a Word doc, whatever you need. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Larry Kuhn as he begins to share today.
Well, thanks, Luke. That was quite an ordeal there. I appreciate that. I didn't know I made such a difference.
Glad to.
I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and the things that I do work is both with individuals and couples in the clinical setting, but also I work in organizations. And I'll have the experience frequently that my phone will ring, I'll pick it up, and usually there's a very rational person on the other end. And in a very calm and logical manner, they will say something like this: my husband or my wife or my son or my daughter or my coworker, my boss, somebody, they need to see a psychologist. And I'm just wondering, I think they're a narcissist, and I think they're a fixer, or they're a avoider, or whatever. There's quite a list of challenges that people can have. And they say, can I bring them in to you? Can I make an appointment for them, and I'll get them there, and then you can diagnose them? I can't tell you how many times I get those calls. So I am thrilled that you've joined us. And we are today reflecting on a very interesting challenge. I find that in organizations, and I do a lot of work with executives, that there are three things that people often encounter: people, processes, and technology. And processes and technology are the types of things that are quantifiable. You can just wrap your head around it and solve that problem. People problems are another thing. And often I find that those people problems are really disguised as process and technology problems. But really, if we didn't have to work with all of these crazy people, it's like life would be fine. And I've found that as a psychologist, my stock in trade in what I do, whether it's in the clinical setting or in an organizational setting, working with teams, small or large, is I do assessment, I do diagnosis, and I treat mental illness. Now, psychology, just by definition, is the ability to predict and to control. It's the study of the ability to predict and control behavior. Interestingly, 46% of people meet criteria at some point in their lives for a mental illness. People around us are walking around us all day, often managing mostly invisible struggles. And it can make them miserable, but you know what? It makes us miserable too. I mean, in fact, I've got some folks that I won't say who they are, but they are fairly close family members. And I've had a few coworkers in my day that it made life difficult to do this. and figure out what you're going to do and how you're going to handle the craziness. And I find that people just really need tools, and that's really the impetus for why we're doing what we're doing today. So I'm going to take an approach that basically will say, here are some mistakes that I've made along the way and some things that I've learned that I can share with you. By the time that we get to the end of this, you'll hear some things, but we'll also provide you a resource that I think will be a good tool, because to me, we all need something tangible. Working with hundreds of therapy clients and executives over the years, I have seen a similar pattern. We think that we're dealing with reasonable people, but the truth is sometimes we're not. My wife has a sister, and she came home and told my wife that a coworker who was in the cubicle right next to her, at lunchtime, it's normal for this guy to eat his lunch, but also to pull out his toenail clippers and to clip his toenails, if you can believe that. Well, now that's weird. Now, it may not be weird for you, but we kind of can probably all agree that it was weird. But what we're dealing with here, particularly with the types of individuals that we're talking about today, this is a whole different type of crazy. And here was my first mistake when I started dealing in a very professional way, or even trying to wrap my head around working with some very difficult people sometimes, even those in our family. My mistake was this. I believed that if I remained calm and rational and reasonable, kind of like Spock, that I could fix this problem, that I could use logic and persuasion and data and evidence to just convince people to not be so crazy and to think differently. Well, I was wrong. And that's kind of a good beginning point. We typically take an approach to solve a problem in a rational way because we're all rational, right? Well, the truth is, people are both rational and reactive. Here's some stats. 40% of new hires flame out within the first 18 months. That's a pretty strong statistic, that they get into a role and they fail not because of a job situation, job knowledge, or something like that, or competence. It's really about the interpersonal thing. We know that over 50% of marriages fail. And the kicker here is this, that information won't fix it. These are interpersonal problems. These are people problems that cannot just be solved with rationality and logic. So we who are all cerebral and we've got all of the evidence and the data that we need to convince someone, it's an uphill battle right away. So people are not simply a problem to be solved. But why is it so darn twisted? Well, here's the thing, and that's why we call it blind spots. Because what seems so painfully clear to everybody else that my problem is, I am completely oblivious to that. So here's Jeff Foxworthy. Look, if you think meetings are better when you're the one doing all the talking, you might be a narcissist. If you delegate tasks, but end up always taking the credit for what everybody else does, you might be a narcissist. If you say that you want feedback from people and you say, please give it to me, but then you get defensive and all blustery the moment that they give you the feedback, or if they happen to disagree with you in some way, you might be a narcissist. But here's the point. Are you really? Are we really? Today, we're talking about 3 common types of blind spots. There are 11 of them that we have identified as psychologists and psychiatrists within the DSM as what I would call blind spot situations that we encounter interpersonally. These are not your normal type problems that you can just fix with technology and information and processes. These are people problems. So we're going to be focusing on just 3 and really just scratching the surface today, but you got to begin somewhere. Narcissists, fixers, and avoiders. Let's go ahead and launch a poll here, and I'd like for you to just weigh in. What type of blind spot behaviors do you frequently see most often in the workplace? Can we get that poll up? Let's see. Yep, it says it's launching. Here we go. Go ahead and vote. What are the blind spot behaviors that you see on display most frequently at work? Let's see where people land. So far, we see pleasing and passive aggressiveness is in the lead. Perfectionism and control. Still, this pleasing passive aggressiveness is leading the pack. No rule breaking or risk taking. We'll let this go just another 15 seconds or so. We've got about 19 votes, 20 votes. Kind of interesting. All right. Well, so far, it looks like pleasing and passive aggressiveness has taken the lead. You know, I have a neighbor who I've spoken about on some of the Facebook posts that I made and LinkedIn. And he is an optometrist. His name is John. Great guy. And we were talking actually last night about this virtual event that we're doing today. And we were talking about blind spots. And he says, you know, there's something else about blind spots. And I really picked his brain about it. The first thing is we all have blind spots. And what blind spots are by definition is that they are things that we can't see, but others can see. And so he told me two things. Number one, we have two eyes, and each eye has its own blind spot. It's where the optical nerve then connects to the brain and the visual message sends through there. And in that optical nerve section, we can't take in any visual information. It's just, that is our blind spot. But what our brain does is it has a second eye. And that second eye has its own blind spot, but they see differently. And because of the nature of them both looking at the same objects from two different perspectives, they compensate and fill in the blind spot. So it doesn't seem like a blind spot to us. It's kind of a metaphor that says to me, I am not always going to be able, and you're not always going to be able to see your blind spot. But if you get another perspective, likely they can see what we don't see. But here was the other thing that he said that was kind of cool. He said there are people that have extremely wide blind spots, not because their eyes are not working correctly. He says their eyes may work fine, but it's what's going on in the brain. Where our eyes are connected to the brain, if you have a stroke victims can actually have the entire half of their brain is not able to see and take that information in, even though their eye is working fine. For some people, their blind spots are more severe than others, but we all have them. I found this video, and I'll send you the information in an email afterwards. James Fallon, he was an Alzheimer's researcher, and he studied genetics, imaging genetics. And as he was doing this study, it's great. It's on YouTube. You'll enjoy it. He had taken his own PET scan of his own brain as a control group, and he had a whole bunch of other PET scans of people. And he was studying, in this case, psychopathy. What is a psychopath? Meaning that these are individuals who have high aggression, tend toward violence, low anxiety, but also very low interpersonal empathy. They just don't give a rip. They just don't care. Well, he was presenting to a group of psychiatrists and physicians, and they came up to him afterwards because he had used his own brain image that he had displayed on screen, and they didn't know that it was his. And they came up to him and they said, there is a very severe borderline psychopath that you put up on that screen. Did you realize that? And he didn't realize that it was his own that he had put up, and he looked into it, and he discovered at 60 years of age that he was a borderline psychopath, and he didn't even know it until he started asking questions of people who knew him well. And the kicker was, he just didn't really care, which was kind of a part of what narcissism is all about. They don't necessarily have the best sense of empathy for how others experience them. So my second mistake that I learned along the way was thinking that everybody else has a blind spot, but not me. And that's kind of our go-to when we start thinking about this topic of narcissism. I've been watching a variety of different sources where people are gathering others who are sympathetic to their challenge of dealing with a person who's a narcissist. One of the common traits that people have, and it comes out in their language and how they talk to one another, is that is our go-to, that narcissism is a them problem. It's not a me problem. And that's always the way it is. The reality is this: we all have insight deficits. Here's some stats. 60% of employees rate their supervisors as ineffective. Only 40% of employees feel their supervisors are having a positive effect on them. And more than 50% of employees describe their bosses as arrogant. These are descriptors of narcissists. Now, there's some research that says, the Peter Principle says that, look, when you get hired into a job, you'll get promoted up to that level where you're no longer effective, because then they don't promote you anymore. So people in management tend to get into management and then stop because they've really maxed out their level of competence. Now, that may be the case, but I think there's something else also going on here. When you think about the rampant number of people who are diagnosing from Armchair the narcissists that they're working with, because it's a real easy go-to. In our assessment or our questionnaire that we sent out, one of the results was that 82% of the respondents said that they practice humility without defensiveness. That's a pretty high percentage. 71% of those who filled out the survey prior to this presentation today, 71% said that they actively seek feedback. We have a large contingent of individuals from the military that are in our event today. And I loved it. There was somebody who had the courage, and of course it's confidential and we don't know who said it, but he or she asked the question, why are commanders always right? Why can't they just listen? What is wrong with these people? Well, the Dunning-Kruger effect is an interesting phenomenon that says this: about 70% of people, which is actually very similar to the population of how people scored their own awareness and their ability to be aware and self-aware, 70% of people, according to the Dunning-Kruger effect, have self-awareness gaps, or they tend to overestimate their ability to know what's really going on and suss it out. So here's the thing. If we are going to deal or lead people, we need practical tools and ways to uncover blind spots. Here was another mistake that I made. I used to think that people are really the problem and they're the problem to be solved. Well, here's the principle and the reality. It's actually more helpful to see what appears to be people problems as patterns. So take a look at what I have on the screen here. I call it that thing I do. So I have a continuum, and along the left-hand side of this screen is normal personality functioning. Now, normal personality functioning is when we're not under stress or pressure, we're not feeling threatened, or things that we care about are not being threatened. We sense that people are available and responsive to us, and basically our needs are fairly well met. That's under normal personality situations, normal conditions, favorable conditions. But then something happens when we encounter something that threatens those things. I use the example of I'm basically different before I hit my thumb with a hammer versus after when I hit my thumb with a hammer. After I hit my thumb with a hammer, I've gotten triggered because something I cared about, which was my thumb, is hurting like crazy. That's when we move into a whole different space. Now that space I like to call it, that thing I do. This is where we have what we call risk factors. And risk factors are when we have hit the wall on something, we haven't moved all the way to what would be at the right end of this spectrum, which would be personality disorders, which are characterological, usually set in place by around 18 years of age and very, very hard to overcome. In that category over there, we have indeed narcissists, we have avoidant personality disorder, we have dependent personality disorder, the three that we're referring to here today. But I'm suggesting there is a whole range subclinically that people can be assessed for, and we can identify that this is their proclivity. This is their risk factor. That's why I like to say, if we can move away from seeing people as problems and we slap a diagnosis on them, instead to see them as patterns, then we start to see that when people are threatened or feeling insecure or are challenged and stressed, we tend to live in a different world than when we are okay. When I'm angry, the world is different than when I'm not. When I'm threatened and overwhelmed, it's different. And it's kind of interesting how these things develop, because when you start looking at it as a pattern and not just a person problem, you can begin to go, oh, this kind of makes sense. Maybe they're just not crazy. Maybe there's something going on here, and perhaps it's related to certain goals that they're working toward, and I just don't have insight into that yet. That's why I'm here today, is to share with you a little bit of that insight. One cool way to look at it is when a person moves from kind of their normal functioning into this risk factor area. We can call it also the dark side of personality when we get triggered, and we all have it. It's a place that we act out in a reactive way, and it is often within our blind spot. But other people are keenly aware of that thing I do. It's often existing as a strategy that has come into place because it actually may have worked better before. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you get louder and you don't feel heard, but you find that if you get louder, you feel heard. That gets reinforced. I guess the only way that I'm going to get heard around here is if I get louder or slam my fist or throw something. People can do the other thing. They get quiet because they learned that if they stayed quiet, they were safe. Avoidant people will get quiet. Maybe they learned that if they became cooperative and sacrificial and over attentive to the needs of others, then they'll get their need met and be appreciated. And it begins to get reinforced. Why? Because it worked. Maybe can move on into some other areas that we'll talk about in the future. Maybe you learned that if you work harder, you can feel a sense of belonging. Or if you obsess over the details and don't make any mistakes, then you can avoid the criticism, maybe, that comes when you didn't pay so keen of attention. So one can look at these blind spots as strategies, as risk factors or proclivities to behave in a certain way, and we have them. I know I have them, and I'm aware of them. The worst thing is if we don't have awareness of our own blind spots, and that's where we really want to focus by looking at these are patterns and not problems. Blind spots can also be strengths in excess. Sometimes when we do too much of a good thing, it becomes a problem. So we get triggered when we're threatened, and we often have an extremely high sensitivity to threat, and our survival needs tend to dominate. There is so much more to say about this topic in terms of strategies of what you can do when you're dealing first with your own and then also with somebody else. If you don't have the insight into that, you are indeed flying blind. As a group, you all did fairly well to recognize the pattern. And I also sensed with some of the responses, and we'll look at some of the requests that came, and I'll publish them here in a second. There's a lot of people that feel stuck working around somebody, working with a coworker who has these blind spots. It's kind of interesting. Facebook has a scrolling algorithm that they discovered that's called negativity bias. And this is kind of what happens when people are in traffic and there's an accident. What do? They do all the rubbernecking and the looky-loos, and they slow down, and you're sitting there going, why can't these people just drive straight? Can't they stay the same speed? No, because people have a tendency to look for mistakes and to look at mistakes and deviations far longer than they look at the positive things of, oh, isn't that a beautiful tree? Or isn't that a pretty stretch of scenery here along the road? No, they rubberneck around the accident. And that's what we tend to do when we're looking through our blind spot. We tend to see other people and the problems that they are exhibiting. And what do? It's so easy to then pathologize them. Call up the psychologist and say, my wife is crazy, my husband is crazy. Can you please diagnose them? I believe that they're a narcissist. I've read everything here on the internet. It's told me that this is what the problem is. Well, throwing a label on it doesn't fix it. And the truth is, armchair diagnostics happen all the time, way too often. In grad school, when I went to become a psychologist, I was at the age of 40, and I decided I need to go and figure out what I'm going to do with the rest of my life and find some purpose. And one of the things that happened in grad school was that everybody started seeing their own deficiencies and problems and mental disorders within themselves as well as other people. And what did everybody start doing? They started diagnosing everybody else because now we knew. Well, when dealing with this, either with ourselves and particularly with others, I want to recommend to you, go no further than forming a hypothesis. Be reluctant to slap a label of narcissist upon somebody. Mark was a respected, sharp, decisive person in an organization, and I worked with him. And he kept people at odds. People in his department would quit under him. And he said, well, it's just the stress. But I mean, they were dropping like flies until he completed an assessment. And this was one of the tools that we can use to help him with insight. Because the truth is, me telling him that this was a problem was meeting resistance. But we began to take a different tack. So he completed a risk factors assessment. And it turned out that he actually and constantly labeled and shut people down, interrupting them mid-sentence. And he didn't even know it. Here's a mistake that I often made, and he made it. Thinking this, if I had a blind spot, I would have surely noticed it by now. After all, it's a them problem. Look, I've been successful. There's no major things that I have to fix. Obviously, I'm doing well in my job. But the principle and the reality is this. Blind spots, by definition, are invisible to us until revealed, either by tests or by 360 tools, gathering feedback from that other eye perspective. If we're looking only through one eye, we are not going to be able to see it. Now, I've seen this over and over again. And in the frustration of dealing with other people, we go to the armchair diagnosis, we slap the label on, and we don't even notice that it could be connected to our own blind spot ourselves. So we want to, number one, right out of the gate, question our assumptions. I was coaching a hospital supervisor recently. I'll call her Rebecca. She was great with metrics, terrible with morale. And we did two things. We did assessment and asked her basically through assessment, how do you compare to others? And she began to see that her responses, oh my gosh, I may have some blind spots here. And she wasn't too eager to embrace it. And then she got feedback from others through an instrument that protected the confidentiality of others, and people could weigh in. So she made several false assumptions and mistakes along the way. First, she believed, I'm good at all of these things, so I must be okay at everything. That's not the case. The reality is you can be extremely attractive, but have horrible bad breath, if you get what I mean. Just because something looks some way doesn't mean that it's all good. Her next mistake was she believed, well, people haven't said anything to me, so I must not really have any real issues. She believed that their silence meant that was validation for her. But the reality was, for her and for many, most teams and peers avoid giving tough feedback, especially to strong personalities or leaders. You can ask somebody, do you think I have a blind spot? They're probably not going to tell you right out of the gate. She made another mistake. She said that feedback is, well, it's just an option. I can see my own blind spot on my own. I know myself very well. That was not the case. External input in her mind wasn't trustworthy. She was only trusting her own measurement. In reality, without feedback, people reinforce their own echo chambers and assumptions, and we keep replaying the tape for ourselves. People will not tell you unless there is some way to get that feedback confidentially. Her final mistake was this, believing that getting a diagnosis will fix the problem. Does it help? Let's say if I slap a diagnosis of narcissist or avoidant personality disorder or obsessive, whatever it might be, does that help? Well, in some way, it may validate your own perspective, but it doesn't really give guidance or tools for what can you do now. Here's the point. Admitting blind spots of ourselves may make us look weak or unqualified, but if I'm not asking for help, how do I get out of it? I'm stuck. Here's the reality. The strongest leaders are those among us who are willing to acknowledge and address our gaps and do something about it. I'll email you a brief summary in afterwards, but I wanted to show a few things so that you could have something more than me just talking about it. And I'll refer to it right here. So we're saying it really starts at home. Take narcissism. Let's call it, instead of narcissism, which is at the end of the spectrum that is pathological, let's call it first, well, I've moved and I've been triggered, and so I'll become bold. And we'll just call it bold. It's a dark side risk factor. Typically, a person who is in this category, in terms of their pattern of reacting, they will have dominant emotions of anger. They have a fear of being found out as being inadequate, so they have to always prove how smart they are. They need to be the smartest one in the room, the most adept, the most capable. Their goal is to get admiration, to manage their image, control it, and they'll do that through dominance and winning. It's interesting that in the general population, and you will have this resource, in the general population, narcissists only are about 0.5% to just under 1% in terms of prevalence. How many times do we meet a narcissist just walking out on the street? Maybe 1 out of 100. not nearly the 30 out of 100 that we think that there really are. Now, when we move that back to the bold area of being a risk factor within the workplace, after assessing people, over 88,000 individuals have taken this assessment that we like to use for this purpose. They've found that there's an incidence of between 10 and 20% of individuals in the workplace who exhibit these characteristic reactivity behaviors. And they are often oblivious to that until they get an assessment and they get some feedback. Within just the therapeutic population, let's say that I would find out how many of the individuals who I'm seeing as clients, as a therapist, how many of them are full-blown narcissists? Actually, about 17%. So there are some strategies along the way, and I've put the top 3 strategies, and you can go over this and we'll talk about it here in just a little bit. But 3 big strategies. What can you do? Number 1, assessment. And that's not just assessing somebody. This is assessing yourself to have objective criteria to evaluate, am I operating with a behavior pattern that is a dark side behavior of reactivity that is boldness, leaning toward perhaps narcissism. Number 2, get multiple perspective feedback. Ask other people, how do you experience me? Now, if you do that straight out, they may not tell you. That's why having an instrument to gather that information and get their feedback, it slaps you in the face and the reality comes in. Oh my goodness, here is a blind spot. Now what do I need to do about it? Because we can dial that back and it can make a difference. Other things and other strategies are when you're dealing with someone else. I've listed them here. Let's go to the second one. And the second one is the avoidant. These are folks who, rather than calling them, slapping the label, avoidant personality disorder, let's say they're not fully pathological, but what do we often see? These are people who have a strategy that when under stress or pressure, they move away. They pull back rather than moving against. Their dominant emotion is fear and shame. Their greatest fear is that they will fail. And the worst thing that can happen to them is to be found out that they've made a mistake. They feel that they need to cover it up. They need to just crawl under a rock and avoid risks at any cost. Don't make any big decisions because you might make a mistake. So what do? Cautious or avoiders will defer to someone else and not be decisive out of fear of making a mistake. Again, the strategies: assessment, first for ourselves, multiple perspectives to gather feedback, how others see us, because we just may be an avoider. And again, avoid labeling. People who are avoiders or cautious are highly sensitive to making mistakes. The third type is the dependent personality disorder, and we have called it dutiful. Dutiful is when we get triggered and then we have a very strong urge to move toward, to make amends, to be helpful and cooperative. Our dominant emotion when you get under the hood is I fear rejection, and I'll often carry resentment. And this is where this passive aggressiveness can come in some cases. But we'll fear rejection. We fear that we're going to be abandoned. If our supervisor isn't there to make the decision for us, then we go to curtains. We are a person who is high on the dutiful scale, is someone who has their antenna up constantly, looking to how others are considering them. Are they approving them? Are they giving them the reassurance? And they're constantly asking for that reassurance. In relationships, this ends up being that clingy type of personality. These are folks who are extremely helpful. They've learned that if I can be contributing and be helpful, then I will have value and be appreciated. And underneath it, maybe you'll accept me. When that isn't happening, let's say I'm not included in an email. Oh my gosh, we get triggered. And we'll have this reaction where somebody else who maybe was an avoidant, they're happy not to be in there, or the narcissist doesn't even care whether they were invited or not. The dutiful takes it so to heart, and they think there must be something wrong with me. And what do we often do? We apologize. I'm so sorry. Count the number of times a dutiful person says, I'm sorry. It's way high as opposed to someone who is a bold personality. So again, assessment, gather feedback from others, and avoid labeling. Let's take a look at somebody that we may be familiar with who would fall into this latter category of the dutiful fixer, the dependent personality disorder.
You see, right now, I have relationship George, but there is also independent George. That's the George you know, the George you grew up with. Movie George, coffee shop George, liar George, bawdy George.
I love that George.
Me too. And he's dying, Jerry. If relationship George walks through this door, he will kill independent George. A George divided against itself cannot stand.
With that, I'll leave it. Like I said, we've just scratched the surface. There is so much more to cover. And we put together some strategies, not only a resource to send to you, but some other strategies. I'll kick it over to Luke for just a second, and then we'll come back in and take a look at some questions that you may have registered in the area indicated.
Yeah, fantastic. That was powerful. Thank you, Dr. Larry. I know every time I get to hear you speak, I walk away sharper, more grounded, and with so many more tools and more insight to navigate day-to-day tensions and leadership. And one of the things we say a lot around AspireVue is insight is important, but it is not the only step to create change. We need to take action. And so today, if today stirred something in you, and if you're ready to take a bold next step to sharpen your leadership, to get clarity into some of the blind spots that might be plaguing you or having a big impact on you and your leadership, I think one of the questions I like to ask myself is not do I or don't I have blind spots, but where do I, that I don't even know it yet. Dr. Larry said it, the strongest leaders are those who are willing to accept our gaps and do something about it. And so we're honored to just give you the opportunity and the chance to do something about that today. And so for today's attendees, if you are live with us right now, we have an exclusive offer just for you. 3 different packages that we're making available through AspireVue to elevate your leadership and sharpen your blind spots. And so I'll talk through these here in just a moment. But we have 3 different offers, and these are going to be available just for the next 12 hours. And so today at, 10:30 p.m. Pacific, wherever that is where you're watching this, these are gone. So we want to make sure that you act on them right away if this is something that would be resourceful for you. In each one of these, they include coaching packages. We've loaded them with bonus content, tons of premium content that's available on AspireVue. Some of the unique premium tools that come with the platform, and thousands in savings for today. And so the first one here, this is the journey that I really went on. This is our VIP concierge package. And this is 15 hours of coaching with an AspireVue coach of your choice, 4 assessments. I just retook one of my assessments recently, and I'm still living in that camp to gain clarity on how I compare and how I show up as a leader. All of these include 360 feedback from peers, direct reports, supervisors. I think it's incredibly helpful to have your spouse provide some of that feedback as well. We include the AspireVue annual subscription to all of the premium content on the platform. That includes things like the Substack channel. And we're excited to include attendance at the 11 upcoming webinars that we have planned ahead. So these are opportunities to gain more insight, go even deeper, learn even more and interact and grow together with some other leaders that will be joining. And so normally the price point on this package is over $6,000 if we were to price everything out individually. But today you can see fantastic price of just over $4,500 for anyone attending today's webinar. Second to that, maybe that's not the right step for you just quite yet, but you are ready to take some action. We've got the guided growth. This is a great step for anyone who senses they might have some blind spots, or you're working with people that have them and you need to learn how to navigate and show up to work with them. This includes still 8 hours of premium coaching with all of our coaches on AspireVue are ICF certified to coach really, really powerfully. 2 assessments that come along with that one might be the personality traits. We covered some of that today, perhaps the risk factors. One of the things, again, we covered today, the 360 feedback, the premium content, and again, access to those upcoming 11 webinars, shared resources, the previous events to look back on them, and $3,600 value if we were to cost everything out. We've got a wonderful price point on that today to make it really, really doable, really available for everyone listening. And our hope is that regardless, you just take one step today. Whether you think, you would count yourself an expert on the blind spot journey, or you're just starting out, take one step today. So if you just need a first step, we think this is a great place to get going. And this is the Passport package. This is a powerful entry point to start the assessment journey, to get some feedback from people in your world to see how they experience you. It doesn't include any coaching right away, but it does open you up for some discounted coaching packages that we offer throughout the year. And again, access to those upcoming 11 webinars to interact with leaders, to ask questions, to ask Dr. Larry questions, and some of the other speakers that we'll have engaging in those sessions. And so we just made that price point as available and as low as we could. And again, if we were to cost all of these items out, we'd be in a really different place. And so we hope you'll take advantage of those. And we've got them all listed here. So you can kind of see some of the differences between all 3 of them. That VIP concierge package, that really is the journey that I went on when I started. And I started coaching, that was 4 years ago, and I haven't stopped since. And it has just been a huge catalyst for my leadership. And I'm still taking assessments, still gaining feedback, and it's still making a huge difference in my world. And so we've got these here. There's a QR code on screen. We'll likely be able to post, or we'll email you the web page to access registration for all 3 of these. But we include the QR code because one of the great things about AspireVue is everything is very accessible via mobile phone and doable from wherever you are. So wanted to make those available to you. And we just hope you'll take a step. The best leaders do something. They take the opportunity to grow, to get awareness into how people experience them. And we hope that that might just lift the lid on momentum in your leadership journey. So with that, we've got some time for Q&A, and I'll throw it back over to you, Dr. Larry.
Great. So we have a couple of questions that came in. We'll just cover them quickly, and I'll let you know, I'll stay on here as long as you want to talk about these things within reason. Here was a question. How do you optimize your working connection with an avoider? Similar to the common goal setting question, should a narcissist always be seen as a negative identity or a problem? So this is how I see this. I like to back away from having something be all good or all bad and putting a label on. If at best, or maybe even at most, when viewed as a pattern, we can see that dark spots or dark side behaviors are often adaptive, and people do these as strategies because they worked well. And there are maybe times that they need to dial that back. So I like to look at it as most like, hey, this is a pattern for you, Luke. You have this pattern, that thing you do. You're not a bad person, but it just doesn't really work well at this point. And let's go with that. What works well? So when you're working with people in a workplace, hey, it doesn't work so well for you to do that. And it may be that you're not actually accomplishing the goal that you're hoping. We all find yourself, you want to give good feedback, but you do it privately and not publicly. There's another question that came up, and this was, is it possible to have a concurrent mix of various risk factors? Absolutely. We often see that people have patterns, and we'll often see elevation of high risk factors on 2 or maybe sometimes 3. Now, I'm telling you, I have been in situations where we've had multiple risk factors, and I'm doing pre-employment assessments of high-level executives, and I'm letting the hiring management know, not don't hire this person, but if you do hire them, this is the type of thing that you're likely to see when they're under stress or pressure. And the kicker is they won't display that during the interview, and likely they won't display it when they're kind of in that early dating phase. Usually takes about 6 months, and then we start seeing that surface. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen this happen where we have many risk factors that are, beginning to surface, and they went ahead and hired them. And then later we come back and go, why did you hire this person? And then we look at the assessment and say, well, actually, this is what we were actually seeing. We have 1 minute left. I'm going to kick it back over to Luke. I'll remain on here after the end of the hour, but I want Luke to share with us the upcoming event that he's going to be involved with, and I'm participating with him on that as well. Go ahead, Luke, and let the people know about that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, really excited. On Thursday, July 18th, we'll be having our next webinar, and we're going to be talking about the hidden cost of poor feedback. I alluded to it a little bit earlier when I was in that really, really challenging season. One of the things that I learned in that season is that my organization had no culture, no structure, no value system for providing timely, helpful, vision fueling feedback. And what amazed me about that season is how much energy it required to navigate tensions when we couldn't speak honestly, openly, transparently, separating person from behavior. It just continually set us back. And so what I've discovered over the last several years and continuing to lead and help other organizations develop healthy feedback cultures is when feedback is good and when the team is gaining awareness of blind spots, the energy that gets dedicated to the mission increases exponentially. And some of that feedback at times, it can be a little bit painful and sometimes hurts a little bit. But when we have good feedback, it always helps us avoid harm, even if it hurts, and usually sets us on course for stunning results as an org. So I'd love for you to join us. The link is there. We will be emailing this out as well. But I'd be honored to have you there. And I'm very honored to get to share with Dr. Larry on this one.
Very good. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Please get in touch with me. I'd be happy to field any questions that you have. I'll be sending out an email, and feel free to email me back. I'd love to connect with you and resource you and your team to address some of these very important strategies that if we don't, they will continue to exist in our blind spots. Take care.